Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to the second day of NDM-25. I'm pleased to open plenary session 4 on explosive ordnance risk education, EORE, and innovation, and to welcome our 5 distinguished panelists. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, EORE is a form of primary prevention as it aims to prevent injury before it even occurs. Clearance, advocacy, and stockpile management are, of course, 3 other pillars of mine action that also contribute to primary prevention. However, EORE interventions that meet the criteria of quality, coverage, and equity are instrumental to fulfill this primary prevention promise. They should be a centerpiece of any mine action program. Over the past years, we collectively succeeded in designing and delivering EORE that better protect people from indiscriminate weapons. I would like to share with you 3 examples that illustrate the vitality of the EORE sector. First, the EORE Advisory Group, an alliance of 15 organizations established in 2019 to provide overall guidance to the mine action industry and identify ways to improve and professionalize EORE, became a vibrant and influential coalition. For example, the group significantly contributed to raise the profile of EORE in global mine action frameworks, such as the Oslo or Lausanne Action Plan. It produced essential technical notes to support field programs during the pandemic, or in context of new use and contamination of explosive ordnance, such as in Ukraine. It fostered collaborations between UN, NGOs, GICHD, ICBL, ICRC, and mine action authorities. The group offered a plethora of webinars on cutting-edge behavior change strategies, and it has recently established a global mapping of digital EORE initiatives. Second, the use of EORE teams to conduct non-technical survey has become almost a norm in the sector. Not a long time ago, there was resistance as this interpillar collaboration was often seen as a potential threat for the smooth implementation of operations. Now it is commonplace between operators because operators understood that their human and material resources should not be deployed in silos, and because surveys require specific social science skills to build confidence with communities and to engage them. These social science skills are the proper hallmarks of professional EORE practitioners. Finally, last month, UNICEF and the GICHD, with the support of Switzerland, conducted the first global workshop on digital EORE to take stock of current digital practices and set the strategic direction for the promotion of effective and ethical EORE in the sector. But as we learned from these examples of progress, we realize that much remains to be accomplished. Today, we will focus on innovation in the EORE sector, especially small innovations that lead to big wins in EORE. As Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated, innovation is not only the most sophisticated technologies, sometimes it's the simplest of things. Innovation is not only about new technologies, it is also about new ways of thinking, new ways of programming. Innovation should be at scale, it should make a positive impact for people, not only at local level, but also at the national level and across multiple countries. So this plenary will take stock of some of the innovation in the sector that use creative solutions to improve coverage, quality, integration, and equity of EORE programs. Our speakers will be invited to discuss good practices and approaches to innovation in and beyond mine action, and will in particular explore the promising growth of potential of 5 key areas of development. The first one being digital engagement. Second, disability inclusive and disability-focused EORE programming. Third, integration into other sectors. Fourth, behavior change measurements. And finally, IED risk education. I now would like to turn on to our first panelist, Mr. Dahir Abdirahman Abdulle, Director General of the Somali Explosive Management Authority, SEMA. Mr. Dahir Abdirahman Abdulle has worked with ICBL, and he was an activist for mine action in Somalia for 12 years. He graduated from Military Academy in Mogadishu, having specialized in military engineering. Tahir was appointed as the National Director of Somali Explosive Management Authority in October 2019. Prior to this position, Tahir was Victim Assistance and Treaties Implementation Officer for SEMA. Mr. Tahir Abdirahman Abdoulaye, thank you for joining us today, and I give you the floor.
Thank you. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first I would like to start by thanking the JAIA, the organizers, and the panelists for this unique opportunity to share my experience on developments in the area of explosive ordnance risk education, or EORE, to discuss an impactful innovation at a crucial turning point in our history. In the wake of rapidly changing global environment with respect to human interactions at the social and professional levels, it is imperative that engagements with the community and beneficiaries of mine action services similarly be adaptive. We find ourselves in a time when innovation is more needful than before, when resources are overstretched, a pandemic that has ravaged the nations, global conflicts on the rise, and at a time when lives and livelihoods in conflict-affected states like Somalia continue to be burdened with the disastrous effect of mines and unexploded ordnance. In Somalia, years of armed conflict have resulted in widespread contamination by explosive ordnance, including legacy landmines, ERW, and IEDs. This has affected communities living in regions along the border and those living in proximity to areas identified as hazardous. Despite the years of effort and resources expended to reduce explosive hazards and to deliver EORE to vulnerable groups, the explosive ordnance contamination in Somalia remains extensive and continues to pose safety concerns and hamper development. To date, there are 173 confirmed hazardous areas with an estimated area size of 56 kilometers square, majority along the Somalia-Ethiopia border. Since 2005, the explosive ordnance accidents in Somalia have affected nearly 1,500 victims, where more than 400 have lost their lives. Likewise, more than 1,000 individuals continue to live with injuries and disabilities resulting from the accidents. Unfortunately, 80% of these victims have been civilians. Further, innocent children who have been killed and injured account for the majority in addition to the human casualties. The affected communities also sustained losses to their livestock and property. In tandem with the removal of explosive hazards, EORE remains essential. It informs affected communities on the risks of explosive ordnance and promotes behavior change towards these hazards. EORE also supports the safe return and settlement of conflict-affected communities, and in post-conflict settings where immediate clearance is not possible. You all might be alive to the fact that Somalia faces significant accessibility and security challenges. Large areas are beyond reach, and the populations living in these locations are endangered by the prevalence of explosive hazards. Similarly, the majority of EORE initiatives have been through face-to-face methods, a modality that has significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. a suitable tool and delivery method quickly become necessary, one that could overcome access limitations due to remoteness, security concerns, public health restrictions, environmental factors, and other considerations relating to the diverse needs of targeted communities, one that could establish a link with hard-to-reach areas, one that could promote behavior change by providing this awareness at source and on demand. Early in 2021, my action program in Somalia adopted the use of risk education talking devices as a suitable alternative to overcome the shortcomings of existing channels, to cast a wider reach beyond the traditional EORE methods, to include hard-to-reach communities and those with limited access to broadcast signals. The risk education talking devices is portable, low-technology, solar-powered device onto which EORE messaging was recorded in Somali language. This device can be distributed widely to households across the country, and the messages replayed on demand. A total of 5,000 devices were distributed to as many households during the first phase, and a similar number will be rolled out within this year. The messages are narrated interchangeably by men, women, boys, and girls, featuring dramatized dialogue with children, testimonies by survivors, songs, and poems, as well as a recap of key lessons, all designed to captivate and educate the diverse audience at their level, convenient even for low literacy communities. The messages are encrypted to prevent unwanted and unauthorized replication or deletion. Notably, risk education talking devices has also strengthened the inclusion of special needs groups, such as persons with disabilities, nomadic communities, and other traditionally marginalized groups, who can now be reached within their context and comfort. Opportunities for EORE were especially increased in favor of persons with disability who could not attend face-to-face sessions. Female participation also increased as behavioral and social patterns were no longer an obstacle. The risk education talking devices' effectiveness was also measured through an impact assessment exercise across the locations. The survey proved it insightful, revealing that up to 84% of the risk education talking devices beneficiaries were receiving EORE for the first time. An overwhelming number demonstrated positive receptiveness, and when compared to other methods, was ranked as the second most preferred methods to receive awareness messages. Nearly all beneficiaries, 98%, reported that their knowledge of the risks and recommended actions had increased considerably. Apart from imparting knowledge and facilitating the adoption of safer practices, this expanded community outreach also contributes meaningfully to the data collection exercise on explosive hazard contamination, especially in areas that had not previously reached by teams carrying out non-technical survey. On the other hand, the use of improvised explosive devices remains prevalent in Somalia. IEDs have been deployed over the years by anti-government elements against selected targets, resulting in more than 13,000 casualties who are either injured or killed. Nevertheless, whilst civilian communities may not be primary targets, up to 57% of all victims of IEDs incidents were civilians. Cognizant of the enormous safety concerns that IEDs pose to civilians and the community at large, the messages include segment of IED risk education, suited for a general audience, safe for the basic messages recorded on the risk in education token devices to EORE sector in the country has not developed IED-specific awareness packages. The need to develop comprehensive guidance to address IEDs through tailored EORE package within the humanitarian context is often overlooked. To therefore alleviate the negative impact of prolonged conflict and explosive ordnance contamination, which aggravates the recurrent humanitarian crisis in the country, SEMA is committed to collaborating with the in-country operators and international partners and will remain adaptive to innovations and global guidance for inclusive, efficient, and effective solutions. Ultimately, the EORE sector must cross-share these lessons and exchange best practices, leaving no one behind. The effectiveness, inclusiveness, adaptability, and transferability where possible of risky education approaches remain the key success factors in promoting sustainable behavior changes. Somalia is committed to these ideals and is proud to play its part in steering others towards the same, as well as we all seek to make the world safer and mine impact-free. I thank you very much for your time and for your support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Tahir. So let me now introduce our next panelist, with Ms. Celine Cheng. Celine Cheng is currently Humanitarian Inclusion's Global EORE Specialist, supporting HI's EORE projects, ranging from emergency to development contexts in 17 country programs. She's also the co-chair of the EORE Advisory Group since June 2021, working with the sector to improve the integration, effectiveness, efficiency, and relevance of EORE within the broader mine action sector and beyond. So over to you, Celine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be able to share a few thoughts about disability-inclusive EORE today. Armed violence is a major cause of disability, and evidence points to this figure doubling in conflict-affected settings. For example, it is estimated that as many as 37% of the Syrian population living in refugee camps is living with a disability. These refugees are likely to return to highly contaminated areas and are at higher risk of explosive ordnance accidents if disability-inclusive EORE is not provided. The need for disability-inclusive humanitarian action is incontestable and is highlighted in various international documents, including documents related directly to humanitarian mine action. On the slide, there are a few lists, but it is definitely not a comprehensive list. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities explicitly refers to state parties' obligations to ensure the protection and safety of persons with disabilities in situations of risks, including situations of armed conflict. The Interagency Standing Committee Guidelines on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities in Humanitarian Action has a specific section dedicated to humanitarian mine action. It calls for the integration of people with disabilities into the assessment, analysis and planning, resource mobilization, and implementation of HMA projects. IMAS 12.10, Section 4.3.6 highlights the ways that EORE can support victim assistance, and the recently developed IMAS 13.10 mandates the HMA sector to contribute to facilitating access to services. Examples of activities that can be undertaken include identification and referral of EO victims, collection of SADD casualty and beneficiary data, and contribution to referral systems. Despite the presence of these guidelines, there remains a gap in the implementation of disability-inclusive EORE. For EORE to be truly disability-inclusive, EORE actors need to abide by international and national laws, treaties, and guidance that promotes disability inclusion. The IASC 4 must-do actions, promoting meaningful participation, removing barriers, empowering people with disabilities and developing their capacities, and collecting disaggregated data are extremely useful action points to start with. In the next few slides, I'm going to use the 4 IASC must-dos and provide tips on how to operationalize them to make EORE more disability inclusive. So starting with the first tip, promote meaningful participation throughout the project cycle. To be able to provide meaningful participation, EORE teams need to be trained in what it means to promote meaningful participation. And this is precisely what HI does when new EORE teams are employed and set to start activities. HI trains the EORE teams on inclusion and how to conduct initial assessments that are accessible and inclusive for people with different impairments. Training includes mapping of organizations representing people with disabilities in the area of intervention, ensuring that focus group discussions and interviews are accessible and inclusive, and developing questions to improve our understanding of people with disabilities, such as, for example, their attitude towards explosive ordnance, their risk-taking behavior, existing coping mechanisms, and preferred communication means. Only by speaking and working with people with disabilities and organizations that represent them can we truly provide meaningful solutions to barriers. By providing such training, HI aims to empower the EORE agents to promote more meaningful participation of people with disabilities. The second tip I would like to provide is to collect disability disaggregated casualty and beneficiary data. As of yet, the EORE sector is practically disability blind because we rarely, if at all, collect casualty data that is disaggregated by the type of impairment that a person may have had at the time of their accident. As such, we do not know the impact explosive ordnance has on people with different types of impairments. For example, if people with seeing impairments are disproportionately at risk from the threat of explosive ordnance. As such, our programming cannot be evidence-based and take into account the risks that a person with disability may face. Related to beneficiary data, if we do not collect disability disaggregated beneficiary data, we do not know whether we are reaching persons with different types of impairments amongst our overall beneficiary group. Moving on to tip number 3, this will be about removing barriers to access EORE and services. And the following 2 examples that I will provide will illustrate how disability disaggregated data and our analysis were able to remove barriers to access EORE information and other services. Starting with the first example, in Yemen, UNICEF learned from previous campaigns that children with hearing impairments were often excluded from EORE sessions and materials were not adapted for them. And this exclusion exacerbated their vulnerability. As such, in their next campaign, UNICEF ensured that sign language was systematically included in all printed EORE materials and television elements to make information accessible to those with hearing impairments. My second example is related to HI in Afghanistan that uses emergency mobile teams that consist of gender-balanced EORE, psychosocial support, or PSS agents, social workers, and physical therapists. The team deploys together to the same community, and the EORE teams are trained to use the Washington Group short set of questions to help identify people who may benefit from referral with either the PSS or agent or the physical therapist. By doing so, EORE agents provide access to services for people with disabilities who may not have received one. One particularly successful outcome of this project has been HI's ability to reach beyond just the initial households visited. For when the EORE teams are asking the Washington Group short set of questions, respondents often directed HI to reach other household members who they thought could benefit from a referral. My last point, or my last tip, is about empowering survivors and other people with disabilities. And this is a culmination of promoting meaningful participation, collecting disability casualty and beneficiary data, and removing barriers. Returning to UNICEF Yemen's mass media campaign, they conducted a pilot project in 2019, especially designed for children with hearing impairments. This pilot project revealed that these children were powerful agents of change for EORE in their communities. As such, UNICEF began to include children with hearing impairments in their videos and EORE sessions to transmit messages using sign language. It's been noted by UNICEF that these children were very engaged and excited to share the messages and were perceived by their communities as convincing agents of change. In another example, HI in Iraq has community safety committees that are representative of their community and tasked to develop safety activities against the threat of explosive ordnance. In Mosul, 2 members of the community safety committees are survivors of explosive ordnance. Following their accident, they were selected by their community to share safety messages and develop activities to protect others against the EO threat. HI trained the CSC members to share safety messages and develop these safety activities, and has noticed a particularly active engagement from the 2 survivors of EO in the process. Based on this success, HI plans to continue to empower more survivors of EO to play an active role in protecting their community against the threat. So, in conclusion, I would like to fall back onto the 4 must-dos outlined in the IAC to ensure that HMA is disability inclusive. These 4 must-dos are promoting meaningful participation, collecting disaggregated data, removing barriers, and empowering. And this is not just relevant for disability inclusion, but can apply to including other marginalized groups. Finally, disability inclusion is not just a tick-in-the-box exercise. Disability inclusion is necessary to understand barriers to access and exclusion due to intersecting identities. Taking on an intersectional approach naturally feeds into being conflict-sensitive and ensures that our interventions are accountable to affected populations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Céline. Let me now turn to our next panelist, Mr. William Colley. William Colley currently serves as child protection specialist with UNICEF Afghanistan, based in Kabul, and serves as the emergency child protection lead there. He has more than 20 years of experience in child protection, with emphasis in child protection in emergencies with UNICEF and NGOs. The floor is yours, William.
Thanks, Shavan. Thanks to the organizer of the MDM for inviting UNICEF to serve as a member of the panelists at this very important conference. Though there was a change in government in Afghanistan in August 2021, the situation is still dire in many respects. The earthquake 2 days ago is a testimony to the complex situation in Afghanistan. More than 1,000 persons are reported to have lost their lives, and 1,000 more are injured, and this number is likely to increase as more people are pulled out of the rubble. This speaks to the complex situation the people of Afghanistan struggle with daily. Next slide. I just want to speak a little bit more about some of the fight related to explosive ordnance in Afghanistan. 4 out of every 10 children killed or maimed by explosive devices globally are from Afghanistan. The number of children killed or maimed from explosive devices makes this to be a national epidemic. Since August 2021 to date, about 82% of children killed or maimed are from explosive ordinances, compared to 16% before August 2021. The child casualty continue to rise due to several risk factors, including lack of exposure to explosive ordnance risk education, many children are out of school, children involved in scrap metal collection to contribute to household income for their families, slowness of the demining operations, and that is clearance and also EO disposals. Movement has increased, leading to more exposure. Given this level of risks and the level of public health concerns, it was no longer possible to continue to do things as usual. The UN in Afghanistan therefore decided to look at other innovative options of reaching children and the general population with explosive ordnance messages through integration. Next slide. This map shows the number of casualties of children since August 2021. UNICEF is working through a network of workers in the field, and they have verified over 550 child casualties because of explosive ordinances. Of the 34 provinces in the country, 27, nearly 80% of them have had a child killed or maimed during this period, as indicated in the map, with Kunduz, Uruzgan, and Kabul registering the highest. This demonstrates the gravity of the situation and the level of contamination in the country. As indicated in that map, you will realize that at least 2 children are either maimed or killed every day in Afghanistan. To address this epidemic of accident, it became evident that we needed to do something new by improving the quality and the coverage of our EORE interventions. I will now explain how we are drastically improving coverage and the cost effectiveness through integration of exposed ordinance-based education into other sectors. Next slide. Integrating exposed ordinances into polio campaign. UNICEF has more than 4,500 social mobilizers deployed mainly in the south, east, and west of the country where polio cases have been identified. Every year, UNICEF works with other agencies, including the Ministry of Public Health, to conduct at least 6 polio vaccination campaigns. Each social mobilizer reaches 200 households during each campaign, which implies that more than 900,000 households are reached. With a family size of 7 persons per household, this means that during one campaign, we have the potential of reaching 6.3 million persons with EORE messages. UNICEF also have over 475 vaccinators assigned in 98 districts, conducting vaccination activities and serves as a platform to reach additional households. In addition to those reached through house-to-house campaigns, some communities are also reached through mosque-to-mosque campaigns. Next slide. There's also a full package distribution and EORE integration that is taking place. And this is done with UNMAS working with the Food and Agriculture Organization to carry out full package distribution. As indicated in the map, a total of 10 provinces have been reached so far with full package and EORE messages. During the first phase of this exercise, a total of 26,000 persons have already been reached. There is a plan to reach over 900,000 persons in the next, 90,000 persons in the next 3 months. Next slide. UNICEF is also working at integrating exposure risk education messages through mobile health and nutrition teams. UNICEF has 147 mobile health and nutrition teams deployed in 30 out of the 34 provinces. A total of at least 2,200 villages are reached monthly through these teams. Each team sees at least 700 patients, implying that more than 100,000 persons are treated and receive EORE messages monthly. If we cascade this reach to the members of the household, at least 720,000 persons will potentially receive EORE messages through this platform. These teams are being provided training and EORE material to facilitate the reach to their target audience. And this reach means that we are able to get more people receiving messages of EORE. Next slide. So we talk about the big wins. Just making a bit of comparison, doing things as usual. In 2021, UNICEF worked throughout the year and will reach 22,000 children and caregivers with messages on EORE using our usual platform. During the first quarter of 2022, with a scale up of our activities, we reached 79,000 children and caregivers. Realizing that integration will make a big difference, we thought of doing things completely differently. And doing things differently, just through the polio campaigns, 6.3 million potentially will be reached in one campaign. Seeds and tools distribution have already reached 26,000 people, and the target is to reach 90,000 people. The mobile health and nutrition team are reaching 720,300 children and caregivers monthly with EORE messages. Additionally, EORE messages are also delivered through other UNICEF child protection interventions, such as child-friendly spaces, community-based child protection committees, and community-based education. With the community-based education, we have worked with the education sector, and we have developed a curriculum that is being used to train teachers to provide EORE messages to students in their respective schools. And in this curriculum, we have a simplified version of exposure ordinary risk education messages and training that is included in this particular curriculum that we use. And this is reaching thousands of students who are participating in a community-based education program. I'm aware that integrating EORE into schools is not new, but community-based education is a different form of education that is embedded in communities and also have community committees and structures linked to it. And reaching those structures with messages means that you reach a good portion of the population. In summary, through the different platforms, at least 7 million children and caregivers can be reached monthly with EORE messages. This will ensure a far better penetration of EORE in almost all affected areas of the country and leads to a much bigger impact compared to using our traditional mass action platform that reach only a small portion of the population. Every child and every caregiver in Afghanistan have the right to receive key EORE messages and be empowered to protect themselves and their community from explosive ordnance accident. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William. Now moving on to our next panelist, Ms. Caroline Sugg. Caroline is the Director of Strategic and Partnerships at BBC Media Action, the BBC International Development Organization, which reaches more than 100 million people a year with interventions to advance the delivery of the SDGs. Since joining Media Action in 2003, Caroline has designed and helped deliver numerous high-impact social and behavior change and media support programs across Africa and Asia. With particular experience in public health and gender equality interventions, Caroline has expertise in the application of behavioral science to communication programs. So over to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much. And good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here today representing the BBC Media Action team in Kabul. Thank you for the opportunity. As we've just heard, BBC Media Action is the BBC's international development charity, and our mission is to work with media and communication to achieve positive change towards the SDGs. We're currently working in 24 countries around the world. Next slide, please. We've been working in Afghanistan for over 20 years, and there we've built trusted television, social media, outreach and radio platforms that engage audiences all across the country at scale. For example, our work around COVID-19 prevention reached about 7.6 million adults in the country, or around 46% of the entire Afghan adult population. Next slide, please. As we all know, the need to support communities in Afghanistan to avoid the dangers of ERWs and landmines is greater than ever. We've therefore been working in partnership with UNMAS this year to deliver a 6-month mass media behaviour change intervention, which is helping people across all 34 provinces of Afghanistan to mitigate the risks associated with landmines and ERWs and to inspire people to share what they know about mine and ERW-related risks and safe practices with others. The intervention has included weekly radio magazine programmes produced and broadcast in Dari and Pashto across 45 local radio stations on prime time slots and on the BBC Afghan service itself, which remains the most popular radio channel in the country. The programmes, called Darman or Healing, include humanitarian lifeline information, testimonies from survivors of mine or ERW-related incidents, Q&A segments which provide communities with the opportunities to ask questions of experts and to share their own experiences, and a drama called Green Hill in which characters role model positive behaviours. Alongside this, we're producing TV and radio public service announcements with complementary social media content. And the TV PSAs are being broadcast on 2 channels that have nationwide coverage and 12 other local TV stations who we partner with, again in primetime slots. And on social media, the PSAs are shared on BBC Media Action's Facebook page, and we're happy to say that they're receiving the highest number of views that we've ever had on that page, with currently 8 million Afghan views recorded in total, and that number's growing every day as the content's being shared around the country. PSAs have covered topics such as taking the risks of landmines seriously, recognising different types of mines and ERWs, as well as focusing on the behaviours that people can take to avoid harm, such as not touching unfamiliar objects and reporting objects when they're found. Again, radio PSAs have been produced and broadcast with the same 45 local radio stations, as well as the BBC Afghan service. And to date, using data we've collected previously on the reach of different platforms, we estimate that we've reached a minimum of 6.8 million people in the country. The next slide just gives you a snapshot of what some of that content looks like. You can see our Facebook page at the top there, and then stills from some of our television PSAs. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? I wanted to emphasize the fact that we're always using a human-centered design approach to design our behavior change communication interventions. And the strategies that we develop are informed by evidence and practical experience, as well as theory drawn from psychology, behavioral science, and social marketing. And we use this human-centered design approach. It includes 5 key steps. Firstly, we immerse ourselves and empathize with the lives of audiences. To create meaningful media outputs, as we all know, it's vital to understand our audiences. And we have local research teams to conduct thorough formative research to understand audience needs, motivators, influencers, communication access and habits, and barriers to the outcomes we seek to achieve. We use a broad range of techniques to do this formative research, but for this project, it involved qualitative interviews with communities across the country and with key stakeholders. We then define our objectives and mine the insights that we've gathered from communities. The findings of research are analysed, and we draw out key insights about human behaviour and motivation that will drive our work. These then are used to develop very bespoke and focused theories of change, which set out informed hypotheses about how we think change will happen through our programming, recognising that the way that people think and act is influenced by multiple overlapping factors. The next stage is to ideate, and with a detailed understanding of our audience and our objectives, we're always developing a range of very creative and engaging ideas for media and communication outputs which can provide solutions to the challenges we're facing. And then design specific communication strategies to map out practically how we will achieve our objectives, who our priority audiences are, what our specific communication objectives are, and how different media formats and platforms will be used. We then often prototype outputs using the findings of this research and then test them very carefully, pre-tested with our target audience before broadcast to ensure that the content resonates, that it's understood as intended, and that it has the best chance of achieving our outcomes. And as you'd expect, we always evaluate our work. Next slide, please. So again, to emphasize that here we're really going beyond awareness into behavior change. We know that much media work in many sectors focuses on awareness raising only, but that's unlikely to bring about sustained behavior change. Therefore, we need to go beyond this and address key drivers of behavior, from discussion to efficacy and social norms, as I've just said. Our formative research in Afghanistan obviously found that building knowledge remains really important in this context. But we delve deeper, understanding drivers of behaviour such as financial considerations, childhood curiosity and showing off to peers, and seeking entertainment, as well as many other factors. And these motivating factors we know are intertwined with very deep-held norms in society and people's perception of their own self-efficacy and their ability to act. Therefore, our output sought to address all of those influences on behaviour. Next slide, please. A very quick word on gender, age, disability and diversity sensitivity. Obviously, given the data we've just heard from UNICEF, children were a very critical focus of this project, as were young men. However, we've also taken significant measures to ensure that the project delivers benefits to women, which is a major achievement in the context of Afghanistan today. We've worked with female provincial coordinators to encourage women's participation in research and in pre-testing. And our weekly radio programme includes a female presenter, and the radio drama includes female characters as main leads and role models. Combined, all of this is helping our female audience connect with, relate to, and engage with our content, and then go on to play a key role in influencing others. We've also considered other groups in our research to understand their needs and respond to them, including people with disabilities and those living in more remote areas. Finally, I just want to say a quick word about measuring impact. Next slide, please. We want to measure changes in audience knowledge, attitudes and behaviour as a result of this project. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And often we would compare people who'd listened to and watched our content with a control group to understand if there are differences between these groups. However, we knew from previous data collected that a high proportion of radio listeners, 64% in Afghanistan, listened to the BBC Afghan service. And for this reason, we were confident relying on natural exposure to content rather than asking some people to artificially listen or watch to it and others not. We've then recruited 400 men and women living across 10 target provinces who we surveyed at the beginning of the project to understand their current levels of knowledge and behaviour. And we've then stayed in touch with them weekly to ask about programme exposure, giving us a more accurate picture of who's been exposed to our content than if we'd asked them in a final survey. And this will allow us to segment participants into 3 groups, highly exposed, less exposed and unexposed, and therefore to compare more scientifically knowledge, attitudes and behaviour between these groups over time. We will continue to monitor listening and conduct an end-line survey this July, and we also plan to measure the reach of our radio programme and PSAs through a large-scale, nationally representative survey that we're carrying out next month under a separately funded project, and we look forward to being able to share the results of that survey when we have them. Thank you very much indeed. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. So now let me turn to our last panelist for this session, Mr. Lionel Peixeira. Lionel has joined the GICAG in December 2020 as a Mine Action Standards Advisor. He promotes and supports improved international and national mine action standards. Since 2000, Lionel has contributed to mine action within the military and then with the UN Mine Action Service in peacekeeping and humanitarian context in Djibouti, Afghanistan, Mali, and Nigeria. À vous, Lionel.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I have the presentation on the screen? Thank you. During my presentation, we will see the link between innovation, education, to risk when it comes to improvised explosive devices. So when it comes to this presentation, I believe this is necessary to define what is innovation. I will take a quote from Emmanuel Sauvage from Humanity and Inclusion 2 weeks ago in a forum that was held in Senegal on innovation. So innovation can be articulated around 3 main aspects. First, we have an issue for which no solution has been immediately seen, then creativity, and last but not least, taking risks. So designing improvised explosive devices is not a novelty. Using them, this is not new either. Therefore, nevertheless, we can observe that during the last 2 decades, their impacts on civilians' populations is dramatic. So education to mines risks and remnants of war explosive coming from the war industry is well mastered. But it's true that improvised explosive devices are offering new challenges to different operators and specialists. Next slide. Thank you. So what is the issue? In fact, there are several issues. First, the improvised explosive devices themselves. On one side, we have mines or remnants from war industry, and despite their diversity, this is easier to describe their visual characteristics, such as the size, the color, its visual aspects. On the other side, we have improvised explosive devices that can be more difficult to describe, such as triggering systems, shapes, colors, effects, their use. Therefore, in their composition, we can find daily life elements. Therefore, we are not tempted to be specifically careful. What we can see here on the slide is absolutely not a model when it comes to visual presentation to be used during the educational sessions. But here we're trying to see what is the issue. What is the difference visually between what is coming from the armament sector and what is being used on a daily basis. So this is to help us to spread messages, for instance, when it comes to visual recognition. Another issue, this is inclusion of improvised explosive devices, of specific explosive improvised devices types included in risk training, for instance, when there is an ongoing conflict, for instance. So a few questions have arisen in terms of legitimacy when it comes to risk for operators, also risk for beneficiaries. So some of the problems and some of the solutions that can be offered. Next slide, please. Yes, well. So, on creativity, when it comes to EORE, this is included. We have this principle already. It is also true for the improvised explosive devices. So creativity is necessary. We need also to respect a standard framework. So despite insisting on the visual aspect of these devices, operators have developed messages insisting on the implementation while still remaining its true place to risk sensitivity, raising awareness on risks. So what is the place of the device? We need to adopt a safer behavior, analyzing combination of different factors. Obviously, the type of improvised explosive devices and their use is also listed. The places also where these devices are more likely to be found. Also, the specific activities linked to different groups of populations. Once again, these principles are absolutely not new, but their importance is relative here. The tools in order to spread messages are adapted. Instead of insisting on images representing devices, we will use oral narrative using mental representation. This is favored. When it comes to legitimacy to name or to list different types of explosive devices or improvised devices, we can think about improvised explosive devices that have been taken or brought by vehicles or by people. This is a different approach. Once again, this is not so much about insisting on the nature of improvised explosive devices, but rather insisting on their effects on population by looking it from the angle of population and protection. So now let's talk about taking risk. Obviously, in specific context, this approach can induce risks for operators and also risks for potential beneficiaries. Namely, in a conflict context, for instance, the different parts to the conflict using explosive devices could consider risk education to these improvised explosive devices as an obstacle when it comes to their interests. Generally, when it comes to risk educations, communities are encouraged to say if they've observed risky devices to the authorities. Sometimes this could lead to risks of retaliation among populations. So this requires a rigorous work of risk management, taking into consideration the sensitivity of territories in a specific moment, specific place. So it goes to also looking at behavior of operators, also including communities that we're looking at. So this is a detailed approach which could help us coming up with solutions which are not binary solutions, education or not education. This is a binary approach. So in fact, we can be inspired by the risk management framework, which has already been described in the 714 standard of action against mines. So standard 714, when we want to report improvised explosive devices or when we want to mark them, this could be the reason for a specific list, which is very important. Next slide. So as a conclusion, the revision committee of international norms of means has mandated a technical group to get the 12.10.01 notice to raise awareness about the risks. So this technical notice also gives additional information when it comes to the appropriate behavior. This should be available in the next few months. This will help people to be guided when it comes to designing programs, implementing them, also with the follow-up of risks when it comes to improvised explosive devices, whatever the context. Thank you for your attention.
Now, maybe we have still a few more minutes left. I'd like to go back to our panelists with some more questions on their very interesting presentations. And maybe I'll start with Dahir. Dahir, with respect to the adoption of the low-tech solution that you highlighted in your statement, what would be your key recommendation to your counterparts in other national authorities?
Bismillah. Thank you very much, Mr. Jay, for giving me again the floor. In terms of the innovations, I think it's key in the field of EORE and the adoption of EORE low-tech solutions, such as risk education technical device, risk education token devices, has proven to be effective to reach the most vulnerable parties of the affected communities, including children, persons with limited mobility, women, and those living in remote areas where other digital means to deliver EORE is not possible. I will summarize my recommendations to the national authorities of affected states in 3 areas. 1, national authorities in explosive ordnance affected areas to encourage innovation in EORE to adopt new solutions such as the low-tech or other digital means. I mean to provide full support from their side to facilitate an environment where innovation is possible. 2, the use of digital EORE, including low-tech solutions, should be an integral part of EORE efforts to provide awareness raising to affected communities. In collaboration with international partners to step up developing the necessary guidelines and standards that are in line with international mine action standard. And the existing resources in the EORE should be used. 3, finally, knowledge sharing is important, knowing that the context can be different and access to digital platforms are not equal to all countries that are affected by explosive ordnance. Low-tech solutions are the most affordable and accessible tools to many affected countries. I would recommend learning from other. I would recommend learning from one another to encourage the adoption of innovative solutions to deliver EORE. The Mine Action Program Somalia is ready to share knowledge and best practices with others to adopt the use of risk education token devices and encourages to further develop innovative solutions in EORE. Thank you very much, Mr. Jay.
Thank you, Dahir. Let me now turn to Céline. Why are we so much behind? I mean, in terms of ensuring that people with disabilities have access to risk education. So how best can we accelerate change between now and the next NDM?
So, thank you for that question. I think one of the things that we have to do to accelerate disability inclusion EORE is to be much more intentional in the way that we deliver disability inclusive EORE. I think that in some sessions we may be reaching people with disabilities, but this is not accurately recorded. And this is only in a quantitative sense. Even if they are present in a risk education session, it doesn't mean that the way that we delivered the information, unless we thought it out before, was actually accessible to them. So I think if we want to accelerate the way in which we deliver EORE and make sure that it's disability inclusive, we need to be much more intentional in the way that we do it, and we need to start collecting disability disaggregated data both at beneficiary and casualty level to be able to adapt and record our EORE. Thank you.
Thank you for this clarification, Céline. Now, let me turn to William. You explained why the EORE sector should not be confined to mine action and the enormous benefits of exploring new collaboration with other sectors. That's what you highlighted in your presentation. So there's clearly mutual interest for this. So what are the gains and the incentives for other sectors, such as health, nutrition, food assistance, and others to engage in EORE?
Thank you very much for the question. I think we need to keep in mind that EORE effect has no boundaries, irrespective of your sexual orientation, whether you are a child, you are an adult, you can be affected by explosive ordnance once you come into contact with it accidentally. So we have to keep that in mind from the onset. For other sectors, I think collectively evolving and investing into EORE will ensure that their target audience actually access their services in a very safe and secure way. So I think it's important that health, nutrition, education also invest in EORE as part of their programming activities. As I indicated in my presentation, for example, in Afghanistan, where we have a huge network of service providers in health, huge network in polio that are deployed to villages and towns, it is extremely important for the villagers to have an understanding of how to detect and report EORE, risks. If that is not available in a village, it is very likely that even the service provider could be affected unknowingly if there's no one to provide that information to them. So I think providing the information about EO risks to the villagers provide opportunity for even the service providers to be safe. Additionally, I think we are investing a huge amount of money, and that is for donors. If you look at the polio campaign, for example, it is hugely expensive. I think having a huge mechanism in place to reach to villages only to have a drop when there was an opportunity to do something more, this is one of the reasons why it is important to make sure that we have this integration. And that is already proven to be quite effective in Afghanistan, because with the campaign that we have had so far with the polio team, we have been able to go to villages and towns with a package of service, not only dropping the polio, but also making sure that people have access to messages on explosive ordnance. So extremely important for them, as it is important for us, but above all, important for the children and the population of Afghanistan.
Thank you, William. Now let me turn to Caroline. It really seems that our sector is not fully equipped to measure behavior change, and perhaps we are not always clear about what behavior change actually means in a mine action context. So from your own perspective, what would be the 2 or 3 tips that you would like all of us to remember?
Thank you. And forgive me if these tips sound quite straightforward, but I think they're things that we all sometimes miss in our work. And the first thing I would say is that we need to start with a really strong theory of change underpinning these interventions. So a precise and a community-informed articulation of precisely what you want to achieve when it comes to norms and behaviours through your programme, so that our evaluators are then able to truly understand what we're trying to achieve programmatically. Then I think it's very important to plan your evaluation, obviously, before your intervention starts. And I'm surprised by how often we still see these evaluations being bolted on to the end of programs when it's often too late to collect the data that we need to inform our understanding of impact. And finally, I think it's very important that we try to more and more design evaluations that are really strong enough for us to be able to isolate the changes and the changes that we can detect that are truly the result of our own interventions rather than other factors. So again, still many evaluations are comparing exposed populations to populations unexposed to risk education content without taking into account potentially confounding factors, and therefore we're not able to precisely isolate the impact of the work that we're delivering. So those would be my 3 tips. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Now, Lionel, why does the sector need new guidance for IED risk education, and can you shed light on the next step for the adoption of the technical note for IED risk education that you highlighted in your presentation?
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. First of all, we I think that the first technical note published in 18 was much needed and welcome. This is to be recognized. Now, why new guidance or why revised guidance? First of all, there have been numerous lessons being identified and learned through an empirical process, that is to say, operators, national authorities implementing ID risk education in many places. So this is to be taken into account and captured. There is also still a request from EORE practitioner for guidance. In many places, some new programs are being developed, and these new programs need guidance. I experienced that in Northeast Nigeria a few years ago. Also, in the current version, maybe some points are to be a bit more explicit. For example, when there is mention of ground sign awareness or something like presence of abnormal, absence of normal, maybe deserves a bit more elaboration on it. And finally, this kind of guidance we think would much benefit to localization of explosive ordnance risk education applied to IDs. It will support local initiatives. So what are the next steps? The revision is almost finalized. We're in the very last steps, so it will be submitted to the UNMAS review board in the coming 1 or 2 months.
Great, thanks so much, Lionel. Now, being mindful of the time, we're supposed to close in about 7 minutes, but maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions from the floor, if there are any, or statements. And then please raise. I don't see anyone wanting to. Sorry, yes, please.
Yeah, Mainz Advisory Group, Sebastian Kazak. I just had a thought when we had been discussing in the EORE Advisory Group the topic on digital risk education, and a little bit on the topic how to reach persons with disabilities. And I think there is a good link, but of course you can't reach all persons with disabilities through digital means, but especially when we use visual means, that becomes difficult for people who are visually impaired. But beyond that, the digital means, at least people who have access to internet, etc., is really one solution to really reach a broader constituency of people with disabilities. Thanks.
Thank you. Céline, would you like to take this question?
No, thank you for that comment, Sebastian. And yes, reaching people with disabilities, I mean, I think we need to ask them, how can we communicate with you? How do you communicate with others? And perhaps technology is a solution to address some people with disabilities. But of course, people with disabilities is not a homogeneous group. There are different kinds of impairments that needs to be addressed, as well as different intersectionalities with disability that needs to be addressed. So I think it's definitely an answer, but it's not the answer to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one last question, if there's any. Please, yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive report that we received from your panelists. I just wanted to actually raise the issue that what is your approach with the local government regarding to involve the community, I mean the target group in the MRE, for example, for undocumented actually migrants, or for the lack of knowledge of the knowledge and information for the disabled people. How you suggest that you can work with the government in order to encourage the target group to actually encourage people to participate in the MRE?
Thank you. Maybe I can ask William to share his perspectives from Afghanistan.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think for many people who knows UNICEF, we normally work with government institutions when it comes to doing our work, not only explosive ordnance activities. So in terms of involvement of local government, at every district level, we do have what we call Child Protection Action Network, and this is specific to Afghanistan. And these structures are part and parcel of the structure of the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. So they are also part of the structure that is involved in the provision of explosive ordnance risk education to the community. We also have community structures. Irrespective of the conflict in Afghanistan, I must tell you that there are very strong community level structures, very, very strong, not weak ones. And these are structures that we work with. So I spoke about the community-based child protection committees. These committees do have link to local structures at districts and also province level. And we also work closely with these committees to make sure that the messages reach out to the communities. So there is a very strong involvement of the local authorities in the work that we do.
Thank you, William. Now we're about to conclude. Okay, sorry. So last one, please.
Thank you. I think for us in Afghanistan, what was the real issue was the number of casualties has increased tenfold in the last 10 years. You know, it was around 200 in 2010, it was around 2,000 last year. And what we've focused on, and working with the BBC and other partners like Magenta and UNICEF, is behavioural change. And it's that mindset or that looking at the problem in a different way. And it's not just about education, it's about what do we do to target the groups that are at risk, and particularly in Afghanistan, it's adolescent males. But how do we create that behavioural change? And I think when you're designing a risk education project, it's understanding what you're trying to achieve in terms of the impact and the outcomes, and that I think is why we've had success in the last 6 months. Is that we re-looked at what we were doing and tried to look at it from a different angle and engage different partners. And you know, in the case of BBC, we're obviously very happy with what's going on. But it was that mindset of changing the way we were looking at the problem, rather than just doing the same old thing again and again and again.
Thank you for sharing the experience again on Afghanistan. Now, I'd like to really thank the panelists and the audience and the questions that were asked. I think we had really excellent presentations and a sharing of really knowledge across the sector. So now, as we conclude, I would like to call on all mine action authorities, civil society, the donor community, the private sector, the academics, the UN agencies, funds and programs, for more investment in EORE, research and development, for more knowledge exchange on EORE innovation and promising behavior change strategies between countries, between regions, and between stakeholders. I think there's quite a wealth of experience that has been gained and can be really further disseminated. Just to let you know that the EORE advisory group will convene its meeting next week. And through this group and your respective organizations, you have an opportunity to promote globally innovative and effective EORE. You can also join the global EORE community of practice. I think there's a slide that should come up on this. And there's a group of about 500 practitioners who share a common interest for EORE. It's free, it's informal, and it's open to anyone. So you can easily sign up through this link displayed on the screen. So let's strive for a world where every child, every community is protected from harm from landmines and other explosive ordnance. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.